Well, hello and welcome to this meeting on the Thursday, the 13th of January 2022, and Happy New Year to everyone. I'm Councillor Julie Young. I'm Councillor for the Greenstead Ward and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. This meeting has been held in the Moot Hall in the Town Hall in Colchester and is also being broadcast live over the internet, where it can be watched via the Council's YouTube channel, where the recording will be available to view afterwards. For those attending here in the Moot Hall, I can assure you that a risk assessment, including COVID-19 risks, has been undertaken for this meeting. Can I remind everyone that seating is socially distanced? Please do not move the chairs. Masks can be removed when seated, although councillors may prefer to keep masks on when they are not speaking. All desks and microphones have been sanitised before the meeting, and I ask that any members of the public or visiting councillors sanitise the Have Your Say microphone before speaking using the antiseptic wipes provided. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practiced alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Runwater Street. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn the microphone off again when you have finished speaking. With the exception of the Democratic Services officers advising us, would participants in the Moot Hall please mute their microphones unless they're invited to speak. The provisions in the Constitution around the timing of breaks will apply to this meeting. I will now ask members of the committee and attending officers to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Evans.
Good evening, my name is Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer. Thank you.
Councillor John Giles, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Peter Chillingworth, Rural North Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Lewis Barber, Lexington and Braeswick Ward.
Good evening, Mandy Jones, Assistant Director, Place and Client Services.
Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Officer.
Good evening, David King, Mile End.
Good evening, Councillor Mark Corey, Wivenhoe.
Lee Scordis, Councillor for Old Heath, Hive and Rowhedge.
We've got one member of the public that's joining us this evening, so I hope the meeting is interesting for you. I know you'll just come to observe this evening. We move on to item number 2, which is substitutions. I've not been advised of any substitutions this evening, so we're all present and correct. Urgent item 3, there are no urgent items. We move on to item number 4, which is declarations of interest. So I invite any member to indicate if they have a conflict of interest or declaration to make. I see no indications. We move on to item number 5, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors are invited to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of December are a true record of that meeting. Is that happy, everybody? Yes, I see nods around the table. Thank you for that. Thank you, Peter, for nominating that. We move on to item number 6, which is Have Your Say. I don't think we have anybody in attendance that has come along to have your say. And so we'll move on to our first main item on the agenda this evening, which is pathway to net zero by 2030. And if we finish the meeting understanding the difference between net zero and carbon neutral, we'll have done well. So over to you, Ben.
Yeah, so this is a report based on some work that the Carbon Trust have done for us, updating our pathway to net zero emissions. I'm going to hand over to Oliver Patrick from the Carbon Trust first to present some of the findings of the report, and then I'll pass over to Andrew Tyrrell to do a next steps for the council following the report, and then there'll be some questions and answer time as well.
Thanks, Ben. Evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you at the moment.
Okay, let me turn my video on. Hopefully now you can hear and see me.
There you are.
Perfect. Evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Hope you're all keeping well. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this meeting. Very happy to be here and go over some of the recent work we've delivered in partnership with the council. Ben, am I right in saying that someone will be sharing slides?
Yes, they should be. Yeah.
I haven't got anything up on my screen at the minute. Okay, yeah, they're coming up for me now. Okay, if you could just share the presentation, I can say when to move on if that all sounds okay. Yeah, as I say, very happy to be here, go over some of the work we've delivered in partnership with the council as part of their decarbonisation strategy and response to climate emergency. So this is an overview of a report that we've delivered titled Review of Key Assets and Approach to Offsetting. So very quickly, just go through some introductions. If we go to the first slide, please. Nothing's moving on for me. I don't know if people in the room can see the slides changing.
We can see them, Oliver.
Okay, yeah, I can't see the slides. I'll just.
So we're on slide 2.
Okay.
If you basically go, if you just count, then that should work, surely. So
Yeah,
we're on
that's
slide
fine.
2. Go from there.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Oliver Patrick, or Ollie. I'm an associate at the Carbon Trust and had the pleasure of leading this piece of work. So I sit within the Cities and Regions team at Carbon Trust, which almost exclusively works with the public sector. I'm the only one here tonight, but you'll see from the slide that there have been other people from the team involved and also wider Carbon Trust where necessary to bring their expertise into the project. We also haven't delivered this completely in silo. Within Carbon Trust, there's also been engagement with the relevant council departments where necessary to bring in their input. So thanks to everyone for their involvement in it. So that's the team. Very quick slide on Carbon Trust. Hopefully you can go to the next slide and you'll be seeing that. We are a mission-driven organisation and we have the stated mission of accelerating the move to a decarbonised future. You'll see some statistics on the slide. We recently celebrated our 20th anniversary and very happy to have significant growth in recent years. So we've now got over 300 consultants scattered around the world and you'll see our offices. We've been based out of the London office for this piece of work. So that's a quick couple of slides on introductions. Hopefully you can get into the meat of the presentation now. So if you go on to the content slide, please. So I've got around 15-20 minutes to go through the slides and then hopefully have time for some questions and discussions at the end. And we can pick up on the one that's already been mentioned around target setting, carbon neutrality, net zero, etc. I also understand that this report will be published online and hopefully some people have had sight of it beforehand. So the report itself contains substantially more detail than what I'll go into during this overview, but the slides follow the general structure of the published report. Okay, so if we jump in and we start with a bit of introduction and some context, hopefully none of this will be new to any of you, but you'll be aware that Colchester Borough Council declared a climate emergency in July 2019. And in that emergency, they set out an ambitious decarbonisation target for the council as an organisation. Now that stated target is to reduce direct operational emissions by 2030 to net zero. It's important to touch on the scope of that, which includes scope 1 and 2 emissions. So this is energy consumption across natural gas, diesel consumption in the fleet, and electricity, and also some wider indirect emissions, sometimes termed scope 3, including business travel, employee commuting, and waste and water. So all of those emissions are aimed to net zero by 2030. But there's also a recognition that the council should pull the levers that they have to empower the borough and drive area-wide emission reductions as well. And that's been touched on in some of the publications that the council have put out recently. So Carbon Trust has been involved in Colchester's response to the climate emergency. Happy to say we've worked quite closely with the council over the last 2 to 3 years. So in 2019, we provided a baseline footprint, and then we further expanded that to include all emission categories across the full value chain. We've also provided some emissions modelling to identify priority decarbonisation projects, and even before the climate emergency, have worked with the council on previous carbon management plans. One important note at this stage is that this is only part of the council's response to the climate emergency, and it shouldn't be viewed in silo. And there's other documents such as Colchester's action plan and the climate challenge and sustainability strategy themes that have been published. If you go on to the next slide, please. So focusing on this project, we're building on previous pieces of work, and since the last piece of work, the council has been working on several decarbonisation initiatives and now has a clearer idea of how they will contribute to the 2030 target. So we're looking to incorporate that additional detail and certainty into this project, and we split it into 3 main sections. So firstly, we undertook a review of assets that are expected to undergo notable operational changes between now and 2030. And for those, we look to quantify and maximise the opportunities for decarbonisation within them. The second phase then took the results from that review and overlaid it onto the council's known consumption to model emissions out to 2030 and see how those projects will contribute towards the decarbonisation target. And then finally, we performed a review of offsetting to help inform the council's strategy. So I'll go through each phase in turn. If we could start with the review of key assets, and if you could go forward a couple of slides, please. Thank you. So the council wanted us to look across the 4 assets and programmes listed in this table. The approach that we took to each one was largely dictated by how established the plans already were. So for example, the operational fleet, the council's done a lot of work already with the Energy Savings Trust to plan a transition to a fully electric fleet by 2030. Likewise with Rowan House, which is the council's main office, that was successful in being awarded funding in the public sector decarbonisation scheme for a low carbon retrofit. So where there were established plans that meet a best practice decarbonisation standard, which both of these do, we didn't interfere too much with the plans, and we just looked to model the impact of those on the council's baseline. Some of the other plans, namely the building management programme and sheltered housing, were either less established or had more room for flexibility and influence. So for those, we've suggested some further recommendations on top of what is already being done. And those recommendations are laid out in the report in much more detail than what I plan to go into today. Also important to note at this stage that Leisure World was originally included in the scope of this work, but as I've put at the bottom, analysis of Leisure World has been restricted due to uncertainty over operational changes at the site. So it's agreed with council officers that for now, there's too much ambiguity to be able to include that with much certainty in the pathway projection. So those are the assets that we reviewed. On to phase 2, where possible, we tried to quantify the changes in energy consumption associated with their implementation. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So this is the more quantitative section and results of the analysis. As I said, where we were able to, we looked to quantify the changes in energy consumption expected by the implementation of each of the plans. And it was possible to do that for 3 of the 4 assets we looked at. And they're listed at the top of the slide. So complete electrification of the council's fleet, refurbishment of Rowan House, and that includes a heat pump retrofit and LED rollout, and then also refurbishment of a number of sheltered housing blocks and a heating system replacement outside of the normal refurbishment schedule. So the graph that you see at the bottom of the page is the result of the changes in energy consumption from those projects being overlaid onto the council's known consumption. And then you can apply emission factors to that out to 2030 to try and get a projection of how far those projects will get you towards the decarbonisation target. The second bullet, I guess, gives the headline figures that by 2030, the modelling estimates a total reduction of just over 3,500 tonnes of CO2, leaving residual emissions of around 2,600 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Text to the right of the graph shows the majority of emissions come from three main areas. Firstly, fleet making up about a third of emission reductions. So that's the total elimination of diesel by 2030 and all the residual emissions that you can see. So fleet is the bottom dark segment, is just from electricity consumption due to charging. Leisure and recreation, you might be surprised to see it as a driver behind the decarbonisation without any analysis of Leisure World, but that's just due to the magnitude of electricity consumption at Leisure World is so significant that the effective grid decarbonisation on it out to 2030 will yield large emission reductions even without any proactive measures. And residential buildings or sheltered housing makes up just under a quarter of emissions. And that's due to both the heat decarbonisation projects, so the displacement of natural gas boilers with heat pumps, and also any unaffected supply being greened by the decarbonisation of the national grid. Important to note that this is pathway is not an exhaustive list of projects, and it is just a snapshot in time to show what we know with the plans currently, how they are. So really what it's showing is it's trying to indicate the council should invest their effort in both realising plans where large emission reductions can be expected. So for example, fleet electrification, this pathway shows that if the plan is realised, then fleet will be almost negligible by 2030. So the council should invest their resource in actually realising that now and making it happen. And it also indicates that whilst leisure and recreation experiences large emission reductions, that's the major hotspot in 2030 and reflective of a lack of plans at the minute for Leisure World. And that's not to say that plans won't be in place by 2030, but it's just saying at this snapshot in time, this is what we know and this is what we can model. So the council should invest their efforts in also maturing plans for those currently undeveloped hotspots. And here we've pulled out Leisure World as that main one. Okay, so the next slide just shows the project level data in a bit more detail. I won't spend too much time on this, but just to say that the modelled reduction in emissions, so the 3,500 that I spoke about, is the sum of implementation of projects and the effect of grid decarbonisation on any baseline consumption that's unaffected by projects. So for example, the consumption at Leisure World that I spoke about. And the graph at the bottom here is just showing the project-related emissions that have been modelled, and you'll see that over 3/4 of them, so the vast majority, come from the electrification of the council's fleet. 75% by 2030. You'll notice that there's a significant drop in around 2026, and this is when the refuse collection vehicles operated by the council are expected to be replaced. In the schedule, it's assumed they'll all be electrified at that point. Which is why there's a large emission reduction, as the majority of fuel consumption from those refuse collection vehicles is electrified. Also see that contributions from heat pumps, so the bottom 4 segments, is significant by 2030, making up 22% of projects related emission reductions. And this just relates to the sample size that we took. So it's looking at 3 schemes. So you can imagine that when scaled, the displacement of natural gas for heating with heat pumps will really be central to the council's decarbonisation. So if you think that this looks at 3 schemes, the council operates 26 in total. You can see that's maybe about 10% of physical schemes that have been modelled. Worth noting that for the council's fleet and sheltered housing, it's envisaged that that this is almost the maximum that can be achieved by 2030 and is achieving best practice. So for the fleet, there's limited more you could do from electrifying all demand. You could have some on-site renewable generation to fuel the fleet with zero carbon electricity, for example. But the scale that we required to meet the entire electricity demand, it would have to be a lot of generation. Also, engagement with Colchester Borough Homes indicated that only 2 schemes will be fully refurbished between now and 2030. There is potential for other schemes outside of the main refurbishment schedule to have low carbon heating options put in, but this is limited to sites where the building fabric is already fairly sound and heat loads are low. So it's worth pointing out that in the projection, both the heat and sheltered housing may be close to maximising what the council could be achieving by 2030. So with that in mind, it's quite a good segue to the last phase of the work, which looks at our approach to offsetting. So even with the projects implemented and under an accelerated decarbonisation pathway, it's expected that the council will still have some residual emissions left in 2030. So we'll likely require offsetting. And if you could go forward a couple of slides, please. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, even under an accelerated decarbonisation pathway, the council will likely have some residual emissions in 2030 and offsetting will be required. So whilst there's an acknowledgement that it's likely a requirement for the council, there's still substantial uncertainty as to what the council's offsetting strategy will be. And it's worth emphasising that that's not entirely the fault of the council at all, and in large it's part because of a lack of guidance and standards that currently exist, particularly those that are relevant to the public sector. And with that in mind, it's hard also for us to be prescriptive at this stage about what a best practice offsetting strategy could look like. So with that in mind, we agreed with the council to perform a workshop inviting various officers, and the aim of that was to shape key principles around which an offsetting strategy could then form when further guidance and standards are developed. So we based the workshop around 3 key themes, and I've just pulled out some of the key takeaways that we got from that workshop. So in general, attendees had a relatively agnostic view in relation to offsetting methods. And again, I encourage people to read the report to go through what those methods consist of. But you can have actual removals that directly sequester and pull carbon from the atmosphere, or reductions where it's just a reduction on a hypothetical business as usual scenario. And you can also have nature-based solutions or technology-based. But in general, there was a feeling that all options should be open to the council. And yeah, as I put there, relatively agnostic view in relation to the methods. People placed value in aligning the offsetting strategy to a decarbonisation target. It's one thing that I think will come up in the discussion later, but an important aspect of net zero and some of the criteria that's issued is that by the target date, decarbonisation target date, all residual emissions should be offset using removals. So that former that I was talking about, an actual sequestering carbon from the environment. So you could have afforestation and planting trees would be an example of removals, whereas reductions could be displacing fossil fuel generated electricity with solar PV. That would be an example of a reduction offset, which wouldn't necessarily class as a net zero aligned offset because it's not pulling carbon directly from the atmosphere. So we went through that, and there was the majority of attendees felt there was value in actually aligning the offset strategy to a decarbonisation target. I think the third point came out most strongly from the workshop, and that was that most people, in fact, almost all people or attendees felt that the council's offset strategy should prioritise offsets within their sphere of influence and support projects within the local borough, which can sometimes be referred to as insetting, as opposed to buying offsets on the voluntary carbon offset market, where projects funded could support. There's kind of no geographical boundary for that, and you could be supporting projects in different regions, different countries, all around the globe. And I'd say that that point came through across the whole workshop and both other discussions as well. So with that in mind, we've focused a lot of the considerations and recommendations on the report in if the council is to pursue insetting and offsetting within their sphere of influence. There's various different considerations that the council should have. For example, it's unlikely that standard or typical offset providers will have offsets available in the local area. So there's an immediate consequence that a lot of the resource then goes on the council to first identify projects and then verify them. So that's just one example of some of the considerations that the council will have to consider if that's the approach they do take. But there's also acknowledgement that you're in a very strong position to actually maximise the benefits of insetting, leverage private sector investment, kind of galvanise the local area into having a really successful scheme. So whilst there are certainly challenges, it's our recommendation that any offset strategy should prioritise offsetting within the local area and sphere of influence before beyond the sphere of influence. And as put at the bottom, I think next steps now, and this was put in by Maggie, I think the council are looking at scoping potential projects for an offsetting pilot. And again, that will focus, it's my understanding, on projects in the local area. Okay, and then just quickly going on to the summary of findings. So hopefully main points from the report have come across. Appreciate that that was an overview of a relatively long and detailed report. So hopefully some of these findings are a bit more substantiated when you go through that report in more detail. But hopefully just to bring them out, split them into two categories. I think phase 1 and 2 were intrinsically linked. So we put the recommendations for those two phases together. And I'll just go through them quickly. So the 4 here, consolidate existing plans that realise significant emission reductions. So this touches on as I was discussing, asset areas such as the fleet, where we know if those plans do materialise, there will be a key driver behind the council's decarbonisation. So all the resource, both kind of monetary and personnel, should be put in place to try and realise those plans. Embed carbon reduction in existing council operations. So with the building management programme, we identified several areas where the council could, just through normal operations, embed sustainability into them. So if that's just from the building management programme, I'm sure there's plenty more opportunities where day-to-day operations sustainability can really be embedded and help drive a culture of carbon management and drive reductions. Maintain an active view of the market. This is mostly in relation to the sheltered housing analysis, in that some of the carbon case for installing or displacing natural gas boilers with heat pumps is clear, but from a financial case, it was actually shown to, in some cases, increase the capital costs relative to a business as usual scenario, and also increase fuel bills. That's based with current assumptions of costs. We're expecting capital costs of heat pumps to come down, and there's also some talk of rebalancing levies from electricity for natural gas, for example. So it's really just making sure that the council remain agile to any changes, actively engaged with the market, and update the analysis when these changes do come into effect. And the final point around seeking clarity over unaccounted hotspot emissions. So Leisure World, it has been identified as the single largest emission source in the council's operational estate, but we were unable to do any analysis on it due to some uncertainty over its operational state over the next decade. As I say, that's just at this point in time, and that's not to say that Leisure World will still be the hotspot in 2030, but it's just really trying to seek some clarity and having a kind of clear timeline in everyone's head as to what's happening at that site, because it is so important in the overall footprint. And then secondly, approach to offsetting. So I've mentioned a lack of standards and guidance, particularly in relation to the public sector. So really, one of the recommendations is just be wary of that and await further guidance when it does come out. Have a relatively agile approach. What's best practice now might not be best practice in 5 years. So the council should be prepared to adapt any offsetting strategy to guidance that is developed. Consider local offsetting. I think certainly the workshop attendees were in agreement that this should be a clear priority for the council. And whilst we agree that it should be maximised and pursued as a priority, there are also several considerations around that. And any offsetting scheme should deliver very real and additional carbon reductions. So it's important to maintain the integrity of an offsetting scheme whilst also delivering it locally. So some of the considerations have been brought out strongly in the report. And finally, target setting. So still some uncertainty as to what the council's target is when we were at the workshop. I think it was the first time for many that we were presenting the differences between carbon neutrality and net zero. But there are standards behind those targets. So it's understanding the terminology and how that impacts offsetting. And in addition to that, there's also obviously uncertainty at the current time as to what the offsetting requirement will be. So it's understanding those in tandem and then coming up with a robust and viable offsetting strategy. That's the last slide that I have. I think Andrew wanted to just tag on the end with some of the council's findings and from an officer perspective. So happy to hand over to Andrew if that's okay.
Before Andrew comes in, can I offer our thanks to you, Ollie, for that presentation, and we'll look forward to hearing Andrew's comments on it. I know there'll be a number of questions from councillors following that. So Andrew, are you with us?
I am, yes. Can you hear me? Good evening, councillors.
Voice of God is with us. Where are you? We can't see you, we can hear you.
Okay. So I just wanted to basically break all of that information down into a digestible summary for the purposes of anyone that's in the audience that isn't familiar with the sort of last 3 years of this journey. So just to remind people just very briefly, and I'm not going to labour this, but we declared the climate emergency in 2019. So we're 3 years down a journey that's 11 years in total. So we've got another 8 years to go. So the information that you've just seen identifies how the carbon pathway that we had in the 2019 baseline has been reduced already 3 years down the pathway by 3,563 tonnes of carbon. And that leaves us to find 2,617 tonnes of carbon reduction over the next 8 years. Now, obviously, each project you do makes it harder to reduce it. So you can make bigger inroads early on, but we still have other projects that inevitably we will identify over coming years, and they will contribute towards reducing that 2,617 tonnes further. And then, as you've heard tonight, we've always known from day one that you would need some form of offsetting, but that reduction that we've already achieved reduces the final offsetting amount that will be required in 2030. So the headline from that, I guess, is that this is good news and that we're doing better than we hoped, and that we'll carry on with that. So in terms of the next steps, if we just go on to the next slide, Matthew or Richard. Thank you. So, oh, sorry, it might be the next one after that. There's an, yeah, that's the one. Sorry, I was one slide ahead. We will we'll create the carbon management plan, which will show how we're maximising the reductions from our assets. And then we will also continue with the climate emergency action plan that the panel have previously seen, and we'll continue to add to that and to monitor the progress on that to help us reduce the carbon even further. We'll be rolling out all of the previously agreed sheltered housing plans. So they are within the HRA business plan that's going to Cabinet on the 24th of January. And we already know that we've done a great amount of work on sheltered housing in previous years, and that's why we've only got a few left to do. And as we've said all along, the best thing to do with buildings is to make the fabric of the building well insulated and minimise the heat loss before you introduce technologies to provide lower carbon emitting energy sources, because you'd still be losing a lot of energy from the buildings if they're not well insulated. So we, under those previously approved plans, we'll be doing another 3 schemes before 2030, and then we'll be doing another scheme after 2030. And we will also be replacing one of the heating systems in one of the buildings that actually does have very good fabric already and just requires that lower carbon heat source. We will also be lobbying. This was something that came up at one of the previous panels. So both the housing portfolio holder and the portfolio holder responsible for the environment, Councillors Crowe and Councillor Ellis, will both be writing to government to ask for funding, because we do know that all councils will be facing a significant challenge with finances on this. And also you'll need market help as well, I believe, to improve technologies that are available to everyone and the cost of those technologies for everyone to make that more affordable. And it's important to know that Colchester starts from a very good position on that front, and actually we're in the top quartile on our energy efficiency of our own housing stock. On the non-housing side, we'll also continue to identify new projects. We've got some potential ones that are there, but the only projects that are included in this pathway projection are the ones that we've formally agreed to do and are committed to. So anything else we'll add to that, as I say. And of course, just that key point that Leisure World will be the big one of those. Obviously, Leisure World has had an uncertain couple of years with COVID. It's been closed at times, and that's part of the reason why we have left that for a little bit longer as to tackling that, because we know that is the big emitter, but we wanted to just get Leisure World back up and open to the public and operating and re-establish that for the benefit of the community and to help with the finances coming into the council. And now we've got that up and running, it's a good time to now go and look at Leisure World and say, right, what's the future of Leisure World and how can we improve the energy efficiency of it? So we know we've got some small things we can do, like pool covers to reduce the amount of heating that you need to put into the swimming pools. But there's other bits that we might look at Leisure World as a building and what we can do with that and tie this in. So Leisure World would be the key part of the focus over the next couple of years. And that was all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Over to us members to ask questions, and I have Mark first, and then Councillor Chillingworth after that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ollie, thank you to Andrew for your work on that, and Ben and the teams behind getting this work sorted. It really is useful to see. I think it's been put in detail, but in a concise enough way for us all to digest this evening, so thank you. Obviously, we passed our climate emergency declaration in 2019, and I was a key part of that, and as leader wanted to see us take action. And to be honest, we did say net zero, but actually I think we should aspire to carbon neutrality, because I am always concerned about offsetting. I feel that can be a way out, and that can continue with carbon being used but especially if you go for market options, you're literally sort of paying off for your usage. So I do not want to do that. I see that as disingenuous. So I would really like to follow a carbon neutral pathway as best as possible. And that links to the offsetting. And I'm pleased with the focus of local offsetting as much as possible in a genuine way that does take carbon out of the atmosphere. And if we can produce renewable energies that help to decarbonize elsewhere, then I think that is genuine enough, but we must go for carbon neutrality over carbon zero. So I admit the mistake of using that language when we eagerly passed the motion to begin with. But we have to be realistic, of course. I think it's really useful seeing all of that in a laser sharp focus that we have. And I hope this panel, alongside Cabinet, can work really closely together over the next couple of years to make sure we deliver the actions and we deliver investment into the right areas to move forward with carbon management. We've done it over the last 10 years, as Ollie and the Carbon Trust colleagues will be a testament to. So we've done it, we can keep doing it. I'd really be interested that we follow the scoping of the local offsetting pilots that are going to happen with Ben and Maggie and others. I hope that continues to come back to this board. I think we could really help to give support for the whole council from this panel to do some innovative work locally, and also to work with residents and experts that are out there who may have ideas of how to sequester carbon that perhaps we haven't seen before. I just wanted to ask, in terms of a more focused approach, if Ollie had examples of how leisure centres, swimming pools have been decarbonised and made carbon neutral. I don't know of any in the country that have achieved that yet, or if there's any globally. Just for a bit of support with that, because that clearly is our main focus. I think we've got to be bold with Leisure World. I think we have to have a whole new complex down there that will be carbon neutral. And also Sem and Creme as well. That was quite a large area of emissions. We know exactly what Sem and Creme do. Are there examples globally or nationally where there's a different method used that doesn't involve that carbon intensive process that we obviously know that occurs? So I think that's all from me, Chair. Thank you. Really impressed. Hope we can continue to take part in this work in detail. And those two questions about examples from elsewhere would be great. Thank you.
Okay, that's over to you, Ollie, to answer those questions.
Thanks, Mark, for your questions. I would point you towards, there was a recent leisure centre in Exeter that was the first ever to be built to Passive House standard, which is seen as best in class almost for energy intensive metrics on a kilowatt hour per meter squared basis. Also important to recognise with that, obviously it was a new build, so it's almost easier to implement a lot of the measures than it would be at Leisure World, where we're likely looking at a retrofit, so you have to operate within the constraints of the building and what's already there. I mean, the crux of it with Leisure World will come down to the displacement of fossil fuels. It's what comes down a lot of the time with buildings, certainly for deep decarbonisation. There's a big combined heat and power in operation there. So yeah, it's looking at displacing that likely with electricity, although with leisure centres there's additional complexity around some requirement for higher temperature heat loads. So showers, for example, may require a small amount of natural gas for kind of topping up what the heat pump would provide at a lower temperature. Cemetery and Creme, don't know as much. I haven't seen as many case studies for that, so I won't be able to answer your question directly now. I could certainly go away and research and try and get some case studies for you on that. I'm sure there is stuff out there that we could push your way. Yeah, Leisure World, I'm also no expert on leisure centres, could defer to other people in the team. But I was pointed in the direction the other day of that one in Exeter, so it could be an interesting case study to see what they've done there, albeit recognising that the new build versus retrofit will be a bit of a, yeah, there's different challenges involved with that. But it's ultimately the displacement of the CHP and natural gas, which will be really required. And it's easy to say, but obviously there's lots of technical considerations that need to go into that.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you, Ollie, for the good work you've been doing for us over the recent years. There are two areas I want to explore with you, if I may. First of all, this definition, carbon neutrality and net zero. It's the first time we've been challenged to decide what we're going to do on this, but I would have thought we should be doing the same as everybody else, and everybody else should be doing the same, i.e. there should be a national definition for this. Is there any movement, as far as you know, Ollie, to get this sorted? Or have we got to go to Loan and say, write to the LGA and ask them if they have a definition? That's the first area. The other is the offsetting, which again, we haven't looked at in the past, so this is all new to us. And I agree that we should be doing it on a local basis as far as we possibly can, going as far as we can on that before we looked at the option of global offsetting, if it's needed, of course. But it seems it will be to some extent. So when we're looking at local options, one would be a solar farm, for instance. And I'd like to explore how that might work. I mean, we have solar farms privately run on land in the borough at the moment. Obviously, that is of no benefit to the council when it's offsetting. But then there's a whole range of others. For instance, we have land which we own. If we leased it to an operator to set up a solar farm, would that qualify for offsetting? Or would we have to pay for the establishment of a farm and run it ourselves? I mean, there's a whole range of options there, but just to give us some idea of what we're talking about when we're looking at local offsetting, could we just focus on that for a moment, please? Thank you.
Ollie, can you come back on those three questions?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, happy to. So firstly, with the, I guess, carbon neutrality versus net zero debate, you'll be glad to know this isn't just kind of Colchester grappling with these terms. This is a very common conversation that we have with, I'd say, almost exclusively all of our clients that we work with. And I think really it's only been put to the front in, I don't know, the last 6-12 months when climate emergencies were being declared. I think it's fair to say a lot of councils were almost using the terms interchangeably, and it was just viewed as semantics. The thing is, there are, particularly with carbon neutrality, when the climate emergencies were being made, say 2019, 2020, that has always been held to a standard. So PAS 2060 is a publicly available standard that you can get certified against, and you can say that you are a carbon neutral organization, or you can claim that a product is carbon neutral in its production. There are now also emerging standards for net zero, albeit they're very new. The world's first was formally developed by the Science Based Target Initiative, and there was a draft version published in January of last year, and it was finalized in November time. So we're talking only a few months ago that it was developed. But the issue is those standards do have specific definitions around what a net zero organization looks like, which to be able to claim to be net zero and to do that credibly and in a robust fashion, it's our recommendation that organizations do align to a standard. Currently, the Science Based Target Initiative is what we recommend organisations to align to. And they have, between the two terms, have various nuances and differences that should be recognised. We pulled up on the one on offsetting because that was relevant to the workshop, but there's also requirements around a decarbonisation trajectory, for example. So to be carbon neutral, you don't have to, the definition states that you have a carbon management plan in place and you have a carbon reduction target. It doesn't specify a minimum carbon reduction target. It just says you have a carbon reduction target and you can offset the rest of your emissions if the offsets meet their kind of quality criteria. Whereas with net zero, the Science Based Target Initiative specify that you should have a near and a long-term decarbonisation target, and they should be aligned specifically to a 1.5 degree warming scenario, which has, you can calculate it on an absolute basis by just saying a 4.2% year-on-year reduction. So that's another example of where the two standards differ, and they are held to actual standards that you can get certified against. So I think it's just important when we're using the terminology, it's about being transparent in exactly what it means against the key criteria. If there is a reduction target, what will happen with residual emissions. There is a slide that I've put as a reference in the deck that I had expecting this question, which might lay out the differences a bit easier. But yeah, this is a relatively new conversation to be grappling with. It's important to recognise that the conversation is being had, and that the council can say, I guess with confidence, what exactly their target is. It's also, yeah, I mean, in net zero, there's also additional complications in that the Science Based Target Initiative don't currently, it's only private sector organisations that can actually be certified by the SBTi. So even if the council were to say we want to be a net zero and follow the SBTi's guidance, they wouldn't actually be able to get certified by the Science Based Target Initiative at this stage. That could change. So it's almost, we're kind of recommending the advice for public sector clients because it is currently the most credible and robust standard out there, and also has relevance to the public sector as well as the private sector. But certification for net zero isn't yet possible for public sector clients. Is that clear? I realise I've said quite a bit. I don't know if you want to pick up on any of those points, Peter, and maybe we can explore them a bit more.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's enlightened me to some extent. It's quite a complex subject, and we'll have to think on it. Thank you very much.
We'll continue to think on it, Peter, I think.
There was another question I asked. I don't know if you'd like to.
Yeah, happy to. So the one around, I guess, the case study of solar PV at a local level and how exactly that works. Yeah, so happy to go into this, and I guess it also has some relevance to the conversations at target setting as well. Yes, solar PV can generally be claimed as an offset because it, in many cases, displacing electricity that's produced from more carbon intensive fuels. I guess in the most important consideration when, or in my mind, when we're looking at offsets is it's not so much the ownership of them, but the additionality. So it's important that any solar project being funded through an offset fund, for example, that is only coming about because of the sale of the offset credits. So, for example, you wouldn't be able to sell any credits from an existing solar farm because the fact that it's existing now shows that you didn't need the sale of the offset credits to be able to, for the project to come into fruition. So there's almost a double causality that the project in itself or the emission reduction should come from the project, and the project itself should come from the sale of offset credits. But the actual ownership of that farm doesn't matter as much. If the council is funding it through an offset fund, and you can claim kind of against the quality criteria of an offset, one of which is that it's additional. It doesn't matter if it's being operated and owned by the council or if it's operated elsewhere, it's still achieving emission reductions that can be brought back to the sale of those offset credits.
Thank you, that's clearer.
Thank you. David, would you mind if I took John next, because he may have to disappear off shortly?
Thank you, Julie. It's a very good and very complex report. It's paved with good intentions. What I would like, and this is maybe internally, is a much clearer costing. I noticed, Julie, that you asked the asset management strategy, 120 million. And this is going to have some very complex interrelationships between county and between government. And the reason I'm asking is because two things. One, I was on a government commission for Bream, and the cost of doing this is extraordinary. In fact, for a new build, it was 42,000 plus, the proposals they've made. Now, okay, we bring it down sort of very sort of low, to levels which everyone can understand. If you're going to build a house, if you want to do this and get it up to B or B plus, I have to say I have a lot of experience because I've built one, and the costings on it are extraordinary. In fact, Bream didn't go as far as they thought they could do. So I think that we need to link in with our planners. And also the other issue that I found was that an old building, trying to retrofit it with heat pumps is very, very difficult. In fact, the ideal thing is if you've got underfloor heating and stone and hardwood and God knows what else, it's going to cost an awful lot of money. But on the broader scale, it's how do we influence the normal voting residents of Colchester to do this? It's all right, us doing it. We can, I won't say we'd throw money at it. I think it's actually a very good thing that we should do. Set an example. But the problem is that we've got thousands of houses out there which are going to find themselves very in for a dig in comparison to what we're trying to do. I mean, to get to 83, I think, 83 out of 100, we're going to struggle. I'd like some more direct costings so that we can prioritize where we're getting the best bang for the buck. Ben would know more than I would. I happened to be working on a project in France some years ago, and they were using the river next to their leisure centre because that was apparently perfect for a heat pump. They put the heat pump piping in the river itself and took the residual temperature because it stays at a constant temperature. So I'd like, I mean, it's a great report, but I'd like more specific detail to Colchester, if that's possible, just so that we have some clarity. Thank you.
Matthew wants to come on. I have to say that I also had a similar point that I was going to raise, because I think, I think at the last meeting we talked about 25 million to bring our housing stock up to when we get rid of gas or boilers. So we need to know, and of course energy costs will come into that analysis as well. So if domestically we're facing double the bill, then how is that going to affect places like Leisure World? And there's been no mention of our other leisure facilities in terms of the Mercury Theatre, First Sight, the Arts Centre, and what the analysis is around those buildings too. I'll bring Matthew in, and then perhaps Andrew Tyrrell can come in. But John, did you want to say something else there?
Yeah, it's just my usual pathetic bleat, really, Chairman, is that there wasn't an awful lot about the local urban centres in this report and the big villages, and I think they need to be brought in because they will conceptually stand alone, many of them. I did notice that Wivenhoe had a bit of a mention. Didn't see anything about Tiptree or Mersey or anywhere else. And I think, that we are not just Colchester.
And we're not just Colchester Borough Council, are we? So Matthew, did you want to? No. Maggie is indicated, so Maggie will answer all our questions. Maggie, are you there?
I'm happy for Andrew to go to respond to that, and then I'll just respond to some more clarification around offsetting if I can.
Okay, so on the housing front, there is a very detailed piece of work that's just been completed in the HRA business plan, and this will be going to Cabinet on the 24th of January. So the papers for that will be published on Friday, I think tomorrow. When those papers are published, you and members of the public will be able to see the full HRA business plan analysis of that. It's a forecast 87 million to 102 million pounds of works that would be required within the 7,000 properties that we own in the housing stock to reach net zero. And as similar to the bit that I covered earlier on sheltered housing, the approach in the short term is a fabric first approach. We've got 991 properties that are currently below an EPC rating of C. The national target is to have all properties to that EPC rating by 2035, and Colchester Borough Council will be doing it by 2030. So that's the initial investment, and that again follows that fabric first approach, because these are properties that currently perform worse in terms of leaking heat and energy from the building. So those will be things like cavity wall insulation, loft insulation, and sort of more traditional building techniques that have been used for a long time are established, and pretty much any builder can deliver those. When you move into technologies, it's still quite a niche market. It's not something that's that old, and therefore it gets better all of the time and it gets cheaper all of the time. So if you were to just go out and replace all gas boilers with air source heat pumps now, within the HRA business plan, you would be replacing them 2 more times within the 30 years of that plan. So that's why it focuses for the moment on making the actual fabric of the buildings as good as that can possibly be. And then it will come with the technology later. And that comes back to the point that I made in my summary. And this also addresses Councillor Jowers' comment about how do we encourage local people to do it. In that the lobbying for the government is not just about asking for grant funding or other assistance with delivering council delivery, but it also needs to address the market, because really to make this appealing for your normal private homeowner, you would need to be seeing that actually if you're going to do something to your home, like replace a gas boiler with an air source heat pump, that it's comparable in cost as well as performance. Because at the moment, to replace a boiler, around about £1,000 to £2,000. To put in an air source heat pump could be anything up to £10,000, because you need to replace some of the infrastructure and so on and so forth that goes with that. So it's not necessarily realistic at the moment and achievable for people. And that's where the market needs to bring that technology down and make it as cheap and accessible for everyone as replacing a gas boiler with a gas boiler when your boiler breaks. So that's where I think a lot of these things come in. And so we've taken an approach where we'll do everything that we can at the moment that's economically sensible to do so and make those properties perform very well. But we do need the technology to become better. And the technology may also change. So there's just been trials on hydrogen, and hydrogen would use the same pipes as gas boilers, but replace gas boilers with hydrogen boilers, which is a cleaner energy. At the moment, that technology hasn't really been successfully used in a way that it will be able to be rolled out and replace gas boilers imminently, but it's a large area of focus, and that would be less disruptive for people, because it would just be a case of taking your boiler off and not having to take all of the pipes out of the walls and so on and so forth. So I think that's somewhere where nationally there will be a focus and investment, expertise and resources put into that. And that will make that then available to every householder. So again, if you went out and replaced everything with an air source heat pump today, in 5 years, you might be saying we now need to take the air source heat pumps out and put hydrogen back in, but we've already taken all of the pipework out. So I think we really are in a bit of a sort of tipping point as to what's going on in the world, and you don't want to sort of jump too fast, or you might jump in the wrong direction, I guess, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That was very informative. I've got David next.
Thank you, Chair. Coming at the tail, the good news is your colleagues have covered most of the points that come to mind, but for a bit of reinforcement, and I will keep this brief, this set of nuances around what it is that we're running for has got to be sorted. But for the moment, I've been really clear about this. We follow what the nation follows, don't we? And at the moment, the government commits us to net zero, and the language may vary from that, but I'll stick with that. We should have the dialogue and have the discussion wherever it needs to be had. I'm interested, and I'm one of the Essex commissioners, for that will be worth, we'll see, that Essex, of course, has got net zero, making Essex carbon neutral, which I think is a great sort of way of trying to cover everything. But we shouldn't make this the real discussion. What we've got to say to ourselves is, surely, what is it that we can do, at what rate and at what pace, that counts as technologically sensible and financially, fiscally prudent? Anything else, frankly, it would be nuts, because any investments that are overtaken by events and investments which are destructive of our other priorities are not going to be helpful to the selling point that you have made, John, that we've got to get the people of the borough, to the extent they pay this attention, to think about this in ways of owning the changes that lie ahead. So our examples have got to be ones which are translatable. So I'm up for seeing the detail. I like to see the projects. I like to see what's practical. Bang for buck, absolutely. If we have to make investment decisions, we need to know what carbon consequence they're going to have, and we need to test these all the time in a clearest way we can against those challenges that are acknowledged of the technology will change. There is absolutely no point to take Andrew's illustration in pouring huge amounts of money into heat pumps, which are going to be replaced by new technology, which will be a half or a third or a quarter of the price as the technology refines. So I think we need some realism, lots of it. It's not a lack of commitment to what we're doing at all. It's about making sure that our wider duties lead us to focus really tightly on what gives us best return. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I mean, I think whatever we can do in terms of educating the public, we should be doing. And I'll bring Maggie in. I know she wanted to come in. I do feel that we're doing our own bit here by cutting admissions. There's lots of hot air in the room, but not coming my way, I don't think. I've got my coat on, so we're busy cutting emissions as we speak. So I'll bring Maggie in, but I think that, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I think understanding what Andrew Tyrrell has told us about, if you replace a gas boiler, it's 2,000, but if you try for an air source heat pump, it's 10,000, is beyond the reach of most people, I would imagine, or certainly something they wouldn't prioritize spending 10,000 on. But if there was something we could do about encouraging people to make sure that lofts are insulated and cavities are insulated. And I think there's always been a bit of debate about the validity of cavity wall insulation. I know my dad was very against it. He felt that cavity actually gave, it's a bit like a vacuum blast, isn't it? But whatever we can do to sort of help the public with that journey, I think we perhaps should be. I'm not sure what that looks like, but we could perhaps do something around social media about first steps, because I know certainly I'm concerned about my energy bills going up. And if we could look at how we could do more insulation and how that might help energy bills, that would be something that I'd very much support. Mandy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to come in, but I think Maggie will probably be able to add to this. But my understanding of the definitions, the carbon neutral and net zero, is that the ambition that we had was to be a carbon neutral organisation with operational net zero emissions. And that was defined within our, what we could directly control, which is our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which were the assets that were part of the report that Ollie was putting forward tonight. So it was what we can kind of directly control within our buildings that we can reduce to net zero. That doesn't necessarily mean that the whole bit of it is net zero. So actually what you need to do is the definition is different in relation to the offsetting, as we've heard from Ollie. But I think the other bit is around what Councillor Giles was saying about the public, is that there is a recognition, and Andrew's pointed to this, that government grants will be forthcoming for this kind of retrofitting change. And we have just accessed one for the private sector housing team to help with grants to do some of that kind of energy efficiency. So Ben's got more information on that, but I think that was £600,000 grant, wasn't it? So the private sector housing team will be able to hire people to be able to help private homes make these changes to become net zero. So, you know, we are looking at every opportunity to look for those forms of funding, but I think that's the crux of it, is actually it's about being able to afford to make those changes to your home.
Maggie.
Thank you. I wanted to address Councillor Chillingworth's question about offsetting, and I thank Ollie for his highlight about the differences. And Ollie and I have had debates on this because the offsetting has come through a corporate sector approach. So areas around additionality don't necessarily apply to public sector. And we see councils across the UK developing their own offsetting schemes that help to reduce their own emissions and take carbon out of the atmosphere in their area. And I think we're able to do that at any time, whether it's a second thought or whether we start to create new. So for example, just to make this like really real and clear, as like the solar farm was one example, that we will have a solar farm soon. We already have our e-cargo bikes for businesses. So we have taken out carbon emissions that would have been put in from travel. And so we can ask people to put in money towards that project and make it into an offsetting scheme. So say somebody like me that's traveling from Canada, taking a flight, and I want to offset my pollution, I can say, here you go, here's 120 quid for the e-cargo bike work. So and we've already heard from different community members where they want to see this, and we've heard from different businesses that they're already looking at how to be smart and sensible about their emissions and how they would like to offset. So I know this isn't the space where we wanted to debate it. This was mainly our first chance to say to the council, let's all think about this. Let's all recognize that we don't have to wait until 2030 to maximize on offsetting. We're saying offsetting can be used for lots of reasons. It can be for a revenue generating scheme for our current work, such as the e-cargo bike work. It can be a income generating scheme for new solar plants, and et cetera, et cetera. And it can also be a way of getting Colchester on the map. So there's lots of different reasons why we might do it. We're not saying we're going to offset the 2,000 plus that's remaining. That's not sensible. We know we can do more with the leisure centres. We haven't even programmed that in. What we're saying is we know we'll have residual emissions because we have heritage sites. And so how are we going to offset that? But in the meantime, can we start building up our capacity to think about what kind of opportunity, economic opportunity is there currently that we have for offsetting? That's why I wanted to pitch it in quite early, but I don't want it to detract from this really important report that shows that we are on the best practice trajectory. We're 5% reduction in emissions yearly, so that, you know, we could start to say, well, let's go net zero if we wanted to, but we've said we're carbon neutral because we've started on a journey, and it's great if we think we can be carbon neutral and plus, carbon neutral plus, and, you know, invent our own term if we wanted. But the point is that we're certain on where we're going to, but how we communicate it out to others, whether we want to apply for standards or not standards, that's we haven't spent time on that, because we all are in agreement about what we're working towards, and that was net zero by 2030, and we've used that carbon neutrality message once we signed up. So I hope that's been helpful.
Yes, thank you, Maggie. I've got Ollie who wants to come in.
Thank you. Yeah, a few points on a couple of the conversations that have just been had. I think the offsetting question is, as I say, the standards and guidance currently out there I'd agree with Maggie, they're not fit for purpose for the public sector. I would respectfully challenge the idea that they wouldn't have to be additional, and that the council could sell credits associated with projects that would be funded anyway as a way of monetizing those projects. I think any fund would have to be really tightly managed and held to scrutiny, and it would be the council's responsibility to make sure that that is being delivered in a robust way. A lot of the criticism about the voluntary offset market at the minute at a global level, a lot of people question the additionality of some of those projects, and it in a lot of cases undermines the credibility of those offsets. So at a local level, the council certainly wouldn't want to be drawn into similar criticisms. So I think at this stage, it's a bit too early to say exactly what a local offsetting platform could look like. There are some being developed, but it's basically just a word of caution that anything that is developed should be held to very high standards and should be critically reviewed within the council. And I am a firm believer that any offsets should be additional, whether that's from private sector or public sector. Otherwise, I think you could get drawn into claims of greenwashing and not realizing additional and real reductions. So that's just one thing that I want to say on the back of Maggie's comment. But as she says, we've had these debates, and the debates are very live and ongoing. So there is really a bit of a vacuum that needs to be filled with more guidance and standards. Yeah, I had a couple of points just on the what was brought up around heat pump versus a hydrogen. I think from an industry perspective, certainly in relation to domestic buildings, heat pumps are seen as the best in class option and should be prioritized for development. I think going for, or waiting out, should I say, for a hydrogen option could stall action that could be happening now and decarbonisation that could be happening now. And whilst it's valid that I guess that there are trials ongoing with hydrogen at the minute. The government are expecting to make a hydrogen decision, they've called it, by the middle of this decade. But even then, industry bodies are coming out in strong support of heat pumps. I think there's a large lobby group from current gas distributors and people with vested interest that will push the hydrogen agenda. But just looking at the efficiencies, costs, everything points towards going towards electrification for domestic buildings. So I think unless there's very niche cases that might require hydrogen, I would personally recommend that you do prioritize heat pumps, and it's unless anything changes drastically in the next few years, I'd say that the waiting for hydrogen argument could be dangerous in that it would stall action that could be happening now. So that's just a point. And I guess in part of the point around imparting change in the local borough and actually influencing change wider than the organisation. I don't know if I guess it comes back to offsets again, and how you could use those locally based offsets, but you could consider things like supporting skills training to actually then develop the skills and expertise within the borough to go out, because at the minute there's a big skills gap with heat pump installations. If someone boiler breaks, a lot of the time it will just be, oh, this is a like for like replacement. So actually getting it within in the borough as a whole and upskilling people. But again, that's just one suggestion. The accounting behind all of that and actually how you can directly relate the skills training to emission reductions would have to be measured and monitored carefully. But that's just one idea that I had around what the council could potentially do for imparting change, as well as Andrew says, and he's quite right, that over the next 5 years, the market will be a big driver as well, and hopefully cost reductions will make it far more competitive. But looking at what the council could do themselves and the position they're in, just one consideration that came to mind.
Thanks very much. I've got Mark next.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting to follow Ollie, because I was going to say something quite similar. In terms of costs of boilers, we absolutely need the government to act more, quite frankly. We need to be supported to that change, and the costs of doing it pale into, it's just a drop in the ocean to the cost if we don't act, and if we don't act now. And that's the same in terms of the £42,000 on a house. You know, the cost to retrofit is much, much worse. Let's just bite the bullet and get on with it. Because again, the cost of £42,000 worth of flooding and loss of habitat elsewhere in the world or here locally, it soon adds up. Rising sea levels, so many different factors, hurricanes and storms damage that we get because of changing climate. So we must act now. And I do think we as a borough have to lead and sometimes stomach the cost of leading. If it costs £1 million more, we lose that. That's a cost that we're investing in leading. So, for example, if the Roman wall, if we knew a big chunk of the Roman wall was going to collapse tomorrow, we'd all be putting in £1 million. We'd all be supporting that cross-party to stop that from happening, because that's a jewel in our crown. That is our heritage. We need to think about it in terms of environmental costs. It's culturally really important we promote our heritage. We can't lose that fantastic history, so we would support that example. The same is the case. We just can't see it because it's 10 years further down the line, it's 20 years down the line that our shoreline will start being flooded, that the barrier at Wivenhoe won't cope, that Bangladeshi people are dying because of the flooding there. It's just because we can't see it in front of us. We're not acting in an emergency way, and we have to. And we have to lead, and we have to set an example to others. Like that Exeter example, I hadn't seen it, now I've seen it, that's fantastic. Did it cost a considerable amount of money and go over budget? Yes, it did, but let's learn from that. They were the leader. We can learn from that, but we've got to lead in other ways. And I rarely disagree with Andrew, but in the same way that Ollie has, I think Andrew used the phrase, we don't want to jump the wrong way. Well, I'm afraid we need to jump, because we cannot not act. If we continue going along waiting, that will be too late, and the costs will add up due to climate change. So if we jump into the heat pumps because they are a sustainable way forward, and eventually in 20 years' time we find something else, then we do. But we've jumped in the direction of reducing carbon, which is what we have to do now, otherwise it'd be too late. So those are sort of my two pennies. The only other thing I'd say is the profits that developers are still making are massive, and we need government regulation to ensure that they deliver passive house standards and carbon neutral housing now. And if it eats into some of their profits, I'm happy with that. I'm calm with that. But of course I would be. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
I'm just sort of thinking in response to that. I mean, is there anything, I mean, it's probably a question for Andrew or you, Mandy, in terms of top couple of questions from me is this offsetting platform, you know, how are we going to progress that within the council? Is that something that we can look at in this committee? And the other thing that Councillor Mark Corey has talked about is about setting down markers for developers in terms of the installation of different heating systems, and wondered if there was any thing we could do through planning. And it might be something that you'll need to come back to us on a future meeting.
Yeah, and just to address the previous point as well that Ollie made around skills development too, because I think that's important in our emerging economic development strategy. One of the objectives.
Can you just move your microphone a bit closer to you?
Sure. One of the objectives in the emerging economic development strategy is obviously likely to be around green sector development and you know, kind of planet objective, if you like. So we're working with Fiona Marshall, who's leading on the green sector work, economic development work in Essex County Council as well, to try and combine a strategy which, well, not combine a strategy, we have our own strategy, but to align our strategies around that kind of work in terms of skills in the borough. In terms of green business support, we also have a proposal to utilise a proportion of the additional support grant, or the, I can't remember the term, we call it the ARG, but we've got a top slice that's gone to North Essex Economic Board that we're using to support businesses. And one of a bit of that we've suggested is to support businesses to go green and to utilise green technologies as well. So they will have support and advice around that. In terms of an offsetting strategy, I think that it's a good place to bring that here. I think, you know, in terms of what we do and thinking about sort of working through some of those options in relation to what, you know, what we want in there and what we don't, I think that's really important. I think the planning issue is obviously sort of complicated, and I think there are markers already set down. Karen would say there are markers already set down for developers, but you know, that's certainly something that I think Maggie and the team are working with planning on and looking at what those markers are and you know, whether and how they can be you know, improved. So I think all of those things are in development and being thought about, but this is certainly a forum that we can bring back and keep updated on what they are and get a steer from in terms of some of those wider debates.
Thank you. I've got Mark coming back, and then I've got David and Peter, and then Lewis.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to back up what I said with some evidence about developers. So this money website, which is renowned as a very good business markets website, just to evidence what I said, in the FTSE 100 and 250, 8 housing developers in the UK, they made £7 billion in profit just over 2020 and 2021. So just over those 2 years, £7 billion of profit from house builders. Persimmon were the biggest with 1.76 billion over that 2-year period. Taylor Wimpey, we've got developments in our area with Taylor Wimpey, £1 billion. And I think that we have to understand what that means. If they were actually to put in the developments in Wivenhoe, my town at the moment, we have Taylor Wimpey putting in housing that is to a certain standard that I do not think is environmentally good enough at all. We need to get them using those billions of profits to put in the energy requirements now. They could make those houses to a passive house standard, but they are not. And that is not something Colchester will be able to change, but we can lobby, and I'm glad that I think the housing portfolio was mentioned earlier, and I think he's on side. We should lobby government and use the LGA to get some of that profit put into changing our building habits from now on. Thank you for letting me just add that.
Well, we haven't had much success in getting them to put in sprinkler systems, so we'll just keep going on, won't we? I've got David, I think, next.
I'm conscious that time's going on. This is the report we're taking just for information, but there we are. To try and give some specifics back to Mandy and the team, I think perhaps what we might agree upon. We all agree upon, those of us who look at the wider world, that there are unseen implications, huge ones, with us now coming our way, affecting the poorest across the world, much more significantly than we in the richer parts of the planet can yet see. But here we are in Colchester. Our duty is the people of Colchester is to use our assets well. And I think all we're trying to say, Mark, if I can put this to you directly, is that we need to make our decisions in a staged way alive to what we can gain from it against the challenge you set as leader, or help create, which is getting our carbon reductions down to, however we might describe it, to as close to nil, to zero as is possible, whatever the framework. So the points I would just want to stress, which I hope Mandy would take away, are we need to see as soon as we can, I know officers will be working on this, what that forward path is in terms of real decisions, the financial implications of them, and the carbon benefits. And we've said this before, we know it's difficult work, but that's what we need from the Carbon Trust and our officers, is to focus upon those decisions when they can, alive to what we can do. So it is a very simple phrase, bang for buck, but actually it's a relevant one, because we will run out of road unless there are resources beyond this council, which of course we know there will be, and we should lobby for those. So I don't want to see this as defeatist. This is entirely practical. It's all about moving at best pace to make the best impact that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you. I have sympathy with Councillor Corey's desires for speed, but I'm afraid we have no control over the developers. The government have, because they set the building regulations. For years, I was lobbying our MP to get movement on the building regs. And last year, they held a consultation on Future Homes 25. And that was basically to bring building regulations up to speed for the future. And they will happen, I think, in 25. But the industry, to be realistic, needs about 5 years to move to that level because of the skills and the resources needed to get to that standard in everyday life for all builders. And there's nothing we really can do, although I wish we could. So that's one point. The other one is on heat pumps. John is saying that heat pumps can't be fitted in old houses easily. Well, I have done so in our house, which is partly 16th century and partly 19th century. And it costs quite a lot at the time, but this was 5 years ago. It would be a lot less now. We didn't have to do much in the way of retrofitting because I'd done insulation first. And I think that's very important. But at the same time, we gave up oil, which was a saving of about 2,000 a year. Our electricity bill has gone up considerably, but it doesn't, it's still cheaper. And this is an old, large, drafty house. We've tried to get rid of the drafts, we've tried to insulate it, but it works. It works. We have very comfortable central heating based on slightly increased radiators and plenty of hot water. And it also covers our annex as well. So I don't want to be too pessimistic about heat pumps. I agree they are the future, and I think the government are going for it. Thank you.
That's really interesting, Peter. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ollie, for your presentation and for the follow-up points you've made and answering questions, as well as to our staff as well for their work. It's been fascinating and pretty intellectually rigorous, I have to say, listening to the report this evening. It's given myself quite a lot to think about, even just on a personal level, but I also hope, I think as an authority, it's started a wider debate about the direction of travel we're going in. What's really reassuring is we're all sort of on the same page length in that we all want to see our authority tackle this issue, because there is people and councillors out there who haven't quite grasped the level of danger the climate is in and the environment is in. And although I absolutely agree it's vital we understand the costs of the work we're doing, I would associate myself with the comments of Councillor Corey in that I think evidence is here now that the costs of not doing anything is far more than the cost of doing something. We have got ourselves into a regrettable position where we are seeing at a local level an increase in floods, and the cabinet member at Highways has said it's in part contributed to the fact that there's change in the environment. So we are starting to see, even at the most local level, dramatic, in such a short amount of time, in the last 2 years I've seen the difference, impact on budgets, on our lifestyles, on habitats as well, so, and all the other associated aspects of our world. So it's really, really vital that we do what we can as a corporate organisation, which I think is largely what this report focuses on. But then there is the wider discussion we're having as well that we've touched on about how we influence the public as well, and our duty in that respect. And I want to make sure, and I'm really pleased with the work we seem to be doing on the corporate organisation front. But I guess maybe now we're getting ourselves into a position where we can say we're doing what we need to do. We probably have an ability and more leverage to encourage other people to do so as well as private businesses, because we can say we are a big organisation. If we were a private business, we would be classed as a big local organisation. So if we can go out to the private sector and say, look at what we've done, obviously it's not all transferable directly because all businesses and organisations are different, but ultimately if we can say we can do it, here's a blueprint and some expertise to assist. Now we're in the fortunate position, of course, in that how to say it, we have a steady stream of income, so we can a relatively steady stream of income that we can maybe budget a bit more easily than private sector businesses. I recognise that. However, I do think putting ourselves in a strong position really helps us in the community in going out there and improving the environment and the carbon neutrality or net zero of organisations locally. So the two interlink, and I'm really, really pleased actually with the discussion this evening. Originally, I was thinking I was just going to ask about living walls actually, but to be honest, the debate has gone far beyond a question of living walls, because I really think the intellectual rigour I've heard from the teams and also colleagues here is really reassuring. And there's no particular need to follow up. I just wanted to say those words on this important issue. I think the climate's the biggest challenge we have, and I think every year since I've been elected in 2016 and you start seeing the impact it's having, I feel more alarmed by it. We can't tackle other issues until we get on top of the climate as well, and the environment and all other issues associated with it. But excellent report, and thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you, Lewis. I've got Ollie who wants to come back, and then I think we'll call it a day on that item and move on. So Ollie, please.
Yeah, so I'll be very quick. And thanks for those comments, Lewis. It was actually, my comment was in relation to some of the other conversations around developers and what can be done there. I'm not saying that this, I haven't looked into the feasibility of applying it elsewhere, but I would just point people in the direction of the case study that was included in the offsetting briefing paper at the back of the report, and the London plan. And what they say is that all developers should have a minimum of 35% on-site carbon improvement on national building regulations. And anything that falls short of that, the developers have to pay £95 per tonne per year, which then goes into an offset fund, which is distributed amongst the local planning authorities in London to support carbon reduction projects in the area. So it was just something that seemed relevant to the conversation, and I just wanted to flag it to everyone. Again, I don't know on actual kind of feasibility of implementation, but it shows that it has been done somewhere else.
Well, I think that's really helpful. Thank you very much for Ollie for bringing our attention to that. And I think Ben and Mandy, can we capture that and see if we can do something similar here in Colchester? Thank you. So if we're okay with that, I see, yeah, so the report is just for noting. But a very interesting discussion, as we always have at this committee. And then I move on to the next item, which is our action plan. So the Climate Emergency Action Plan update. And Ben is going to introduce the item, please. And you're leaving, John.
Yeah, I've got just to let you know, there's a debate tonight at Mersey. There's nearly £500,000 worth of environmental protection going on, of pumping gravel from the Harwich Haven Authority.
All right.
And it's a massive, really important scheme. In its odd old way, it's contributing to environmental protection. And it's had no publicity at all, because we haven't called on Colchester really. The Environment Agency had 300,000, county put 130,000 in. And I believe that the Haven Authority, it's cost them £1 million. It's a big scheme. And it's a real thumbs up for Colchester. So I've got to go and adjudicate that. So if you'll excuse me.
Well, we wish you well.
After such a gentle debate, this is going to get brutal.
Okay, well, good night to you, John, and we'll move on to item 8 and over to Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is the regular report summarising progress on the action plan since the last meeting. There's a few things that are new since the last one, but because the meeting was only a month ago and there's been Christmas and New Year, hasn't been significant progress to sort of flag. A couple of things I would mention. So the first one, in the report, the new air quality sensors that are being installed in Colchester, the locations are highlighted in the map in the paper, which were asked for at the last meeting. So they're on there for you to see. We've also moved forward with getting sort of electric vehicles for the council's fleet. So the first sort of hybrid vehicles arrived this week. And I think electric vehicles, the fully electric ones, are arriving very soon, if not already. Also on a similar theme, there have been electric vehicle charging points, 3 installed at Priory Street car park as part of a pilot there. They're not open to the public yet, but will be open again very shortly, which is a sort of positive step moving in that direction. As Mandy actually referenced earlier, we've secured further grant funding for domestic energy efficiency work from March 2022 from a further government fund on this for delivery for March 2022 to 2023, which is positive. And as it says, there will be further communications going out nearer the time on that. And I think another one that I will flag, as it's come up at previous panels before, is about the Essex Schools Green Day happening on the 6th of July this year. The first one happened last year. It's an Essex-wide event. Basically, all schools are invited to take part, and it's basically for them to demonstrate what they're doing to reduce their environmental impact and raise environmental awareness. And obviously, that's really positive and something that the council will be supporting in person. And this year, we're also getting local organisations to sign up to support the day, whether that's supporting on social media or whether that's actually providing support in another way, either through monetary donations or material donations to schools. So we're already building up that support list there. And of course, that's open to councillors as well to support in any way they'd like, for visiting schools on the day to see what they're doing. It was a really good event last year, albeit arranged in sort of a very heavy COVID context and with a lot shorter notice than would have been liked. So this year we've got a lot more time to plan it, and hopefully it'll be bigger and better than last year. So I thought I'd flag those. But if people have comments on anything else, do ask.
Thank you very much. Peter.
Thank you. Just a quick one. It's great to see steady progress. And I was particularly interested to see the Essex Climate Action Commission, because this means we're talking with other local authorities in Essex. And I think we've all got to work together as far as we can. We mustn't invent the wheel, each of us. We must know what others are doing and build upon what others are doing where we can. And I'm sure we have a lot to offer in Colchester. I think we're probably ahead of the game against most of the local authorities in Essex, but I don't actually know that. But it will become evident, I think, in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Mark.
Thank you, as always. I did email both Ben and Emily Harrop the other day, just praising the work and the effort that goes in from our officers, and these reports are just a testament to that. And we had a longer report just before Christmas, as Ben sort of suggests, less has happened, but I want to thank them for that progress. I actually wanted to take something that Councillor Barber mentioned, green walls, living walls, because previously, and David and I worked on it, and Julie, you would have been part of it, I think, as well. We were trying to deliver a green wall, and it really hasn't got anywhere. So I actually wanted to pick up your point, Lewis, because I think they should be fairly simple. It proved not to be when we were trying to deliver them. But that's another strategy surely we could be leading, along with highways, actually, at certain junctions around, not junctions actually, but certain parts of the road not by junctions, they wouldn't cause issue. But we really have to do better. And actually, sadly, up Balkan Hill, we all know that it used to be a very naturally green wall. And I question the highways portfolio holder, who I think we all respect, as to why that had to be absolutely hacked away. And I think that was over the top. I think the practice and culture of our councils need to change. And I think it's changing here in Colchester, how we deal with green spaces, but it hasn't changed enough yet at Essex. So they really chopped away what was a naturally occurring green wall. Anyway, back to the point, Ben, is there any update on that? Or Mandy, could you take that back? I know it was an aspiration that we had as an administration. I hope the current one will feel the same. And Councillor Barber, thanks for reminding me to ask about that, really. We hoped to deliver one previously. Where has that got to? And have we got any other locations or possibilities to deliver more, please?
Do you want me to come back in there? I mean, Ben will know a bit more of the detail around any of this if that's progressed, but I think one of the things that came up was the planting, wasn't it? Street planting for improving air quality, I think one of the last meetings, and particularly relevant to some of the areas. The air quality management areas are very narrow in terms of their streets, so it's really difficult to put big planting in there. So, you know, there are potential things that can be done, but obviously there are cost implications to maintaining those. So I think it's sort of balancing what the benefit is against what you know, what actually the carbon benefits, sequestration benefits, and the benefits to the environment are against putting those in terms of the maintenance as well. So it might be that, you know, we need to balance that with other green planting. I know Rory, I don't know whether Maggie's got a hand up, but Rory might be able to come in on some of the woodland aspects and what's going on in his area. But I see Maggie's got her hand up, so I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Maggie, can you answer the questions about the green wall?
Well, I was just going to say that actually green roofs are more effective. But the real point here that I was going to raise, but now I see Rory's lovely face on the cameras there, is that we've actually got a green and blue strategy looking to be developed, and it would be good to have that as part of the mix of potential technologies that we'll explore, because as Mandy rightly said, there's the cost benefit for each technology, and what's the rationale behind it. I can see the wall as being a big communications piece, not necessarily for the carbon reduction emissions in and of itself, but I think it could be part of the rethink that we're doing around the spaces. But Rory, that was for you to say, really, sorry.
Thank you, Maggie. Good evening, panel. Yeah, just happy to come in on that. I believe the previous Green Wall project, I've got a feeling, and I will check with the project team and come back to panel with the details, but I think it wasn't pursued due to viability issues with the sites identified. But I think, as we've already spoken about this evening, I think there's opportunity going forward. You'll all know how the Woodland and Biodiversity Project has diversified in the last 18 months or so considerably in terms of its scope. So I'd be very happy to look at opportunities to explore potential sites and look at best practice from elsewhere to incorporate that into the project potentially going forward. And I think we've got a great deal of expertise and some capacity around air quality and the work we're doing with the air quality team at the moment. So it looks like it could be a combined opportunity we could certainly explore as a team. So I suggest officers take that away, explore the possibilities, and maybe feedback to panel at next meeting.
Thanks very much. I've got Lewis next.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to follow on to comments Councillor Corey said, and to offer, I guess, to work with him and any other member, of course, as well, to see if we can get political support from both Essex and Colchester to support. We just heard sort of officer level support as well, in principle. But I certainly think if any member wants to work together on this, because it sounds like maybe it's just something that's fallen away in priority, perhaps compared to other schemes. I'm sure, just as these things do sometimes, and maybe we can work together to kickstart some of the projects. I'd be keen to do so. Yeah, just offer publicly that.
Okay, well, I'm sure Ben has noted that in terms of getting a definitive answer about why the green wall is not being progressed. David.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues, for the earlier remarks. And Lewis, up for it. It's a former cabal, Colchester cabal. We'll see what we can do. A few observations and a couple of small questions which don't have to be answered now, Chair, before we all freeze to death. The first is, from what I can see, being on the Climate Commission, they are genuine, they're independent, they are genuine, they are really running at this hard. There's a real quality of work. It's interesting. I'll happily send around a link or two to colleagues on this committee to have a glance at. I think there are some also in the report. And they're making budget decisions. Now, those budget decisions at county, from my perspective, seeing them go through cabinet, are absolutely right. But the resources are tiny compared to the challenge. So but you start with what you start with, and I am encouraged by the attitudes. But as I say, the real question will be resources to That will be the challenge that lies ahead, but they're off and running. I think taking the point made by Mark and Lewis, I think it'd be really good if we could ask officers to establish what the points of difficulty are. In my time, they were getting things like a green wall through permits and permissions and approvals can take you, even the best will in the world, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and 8 applications, so it seems, even when people want to be helpful. So I think that establishing, just agreeing on the list of things that could perhaps either be devolved to Colchester to enable us to proceed more swiftly, or where we have a better understanding of how county would work more closely with us, as at times they have done, would be really helpful. And we as members on both authorities will do all we can to support that. We might hope that the chair, the leader of the county council might as well. So that's the first point. I just want to welcome the report really, Ben, and it gets into the heart of some of the things we were talking about earlier. There's loads of good work going through, and we really should be of good spirit about that good work. I'll keep my fingers crossed about the cost, the consequence and the delivery, and we talked about that earlier, but I really want to welcome that. I want to welcome also, Chair, the fact that we've got here references to things we did not do before, which is work with others. So the University of Essex is sprinkling here observations about how we're working, how we're testing ourselves, and that and the climate emergency plan assessment, those are good things. We'll see, as Councillor Chillingworth was saying before, we'll see how we stand. You know, we hope we're doing well. I think we are. Be good to see that. When we start to get that, then we might start to see an acceleration, because we'll have more best practice to draw upon and more opportunities to say to each other, can we afford to do this? Where can the money come from? Can we do it better? Can we do it together? So I just want to welcome it, but I hope there is some value in what I've just said. My couple of small specifics, which can be later, and I've raised them before, are about following through on things we keep saying but don't do. So fixing the link is one, and the orbital is another. And the latter, I spent a lot of time on 2 years ago. I'm happy I did, but it would be really nice to see some follow through, because I know that that requires some investment again, and it's got its own complications. But away from this, Chair, will be fine for me, but I would like to see what we're going to do when. I see a reference to April 22, but on past form, I'm not confident that will happen, or actually on either of them. It'll be good to have that confidence. So some follow-up on what will happen when to implement the vision and to publicise it and make the most of it would be good to see. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, oh, Mandy, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, and just in terms of the orbital, I had a bit of a summary of that today from Catherine, just in terms of what was available and the work that had been done. So I'll send that on to you. But the interactive online map has been completed now. So that, you know, that's there, and it does show the cycleways that are evident as well from that. So I think, you know, the waymark discs and the barriers are being looked at as well, and talks are still being held with Essex County Council about, you know, where we can make the best impact in terms of removal of those barriers so it can be more accessible. It's, you know, I think it's an ongoing community-based project is what she said to me, and so in a sense it's kind of, you know, it hasn't got an end to it, and it hasn't got an end kind of budget to it, and it's reliant on sources of funding. So we probably need to think about how we do that, and you know, the priority areas for that. So yeah, I think I'll ask Catherine for any kind of timescales that she has, and when the sort of completion of the specific areas for you, and try and get some dates around that. But you know, I think there's quite a lot of work going on in relation to cycling and walking, and paths for cycling and walking throughout the borough. So, you know, there's identification in the town deal for the Greenstead to town centre cycle route as well, and we're writing the business cases for that. And there's a lot of work going on around the Hive in terms of section 106s to improve student access and some of those student cycle and walkways. And just in terms of, there's a section 106 for one of the down at the Hive, there's a development down at the Hive. I think there's section 106 for about 600,000 or 700,000, which is about improving the river wall down there and making it more accessible in terms of walking, with a footbridge as well. So there's quite a lot of work going and quite a lot of investment, both from section 106 and from other sources, into cycling and walking, that I think is outside of that orbital, but links to our LC WIPs, or local cycling and walking implementation plan, that Essex has, and that we're trying to link up, if you like. So that might be something you'd be interested in having some further information on, to supplement the orbital work.
Okay, I've got Lee and then Peter. We are due for a break at 8. I don't know that if that's prescriptive or whether members would like to carry on. I don't think we will be here for very much longer. So unless people want a break, plough on. Okay, so I've got Lee next and then Peter.
Thanks, Chair. I won't be too long. I've just got 3 questions. I'll take you 4 actually. Just on the air quality sensors, 2 questions on this. Is this information going to be accessible for the public, so they can see how we're doing, but also what efforts they can make to improve it? And could we publish that as a council as well via social media? Second one is about the struggle to procure electric vehicles for the fleet. It says that we've had issues with infrastructure, so I'm assuming putting PowerPoints on, but where are we with that? Do we know the problems and any time scale? And the last one is there any time scale of when this cycle parking facility in St Isaac Walk is going to open, as planning permission was granted in September?
Are you able to take this, Mandy?
So the one about the cycle, I'm just looking for it, because I know that I got an answer from Jane, but Maggie might be able to come in around that one, because I think that that's being taken forward and should be open by the spring. That's what I got an indication of, but I don't know, Maggie, can we ask Maggie to come in on those ones, those details?
Maggie?
Yes, the spring is what we're aiming towards. We're having some challenges that we're addressing currently, but we're hopeful for the spring. I can perhaps lay that all out in an email. I think that, as well as the air quality, they are up in place, the sensors now, and it's a great idea to share the reductions that we've seen through the media, and so we shall add that as a point. Thank you.
Do you want me to come back in on the other point? So the point around the report and the publication of the report, and this is the Carbon Trust report we're talking about. So I think it's very dense and it's kind of difficult to understand. I think it might be better if we took it away and looked at how we write it for public and how we think about what we're going to do as an organisation to progress some of the work, and then do it on that score if that's acceptable to the panel. I don't think there's any reason why it shouldn't be, but I think it's just the sort of misunderstanding and whether or not you've got the right kind of audience for it in terms of communications. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I would have meant, is obviously you make it digestible for your relevant audience.
Lee, was that all your questions? Okay, Ben, you indicated.
Well, I'm not sure if I got the wrong end of the stick. I thought Councillor Scholars was asking about the air quality sensors and whether we could have that published or not. So, yeah, so the map of the sensors that we've got on here, obviously that's now public through the committee report, but it's not been put anywhere else currently. I will ask the air quality team if that can be made public. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. Again, with the data, I asked them about that. I don't know if that can be made public, but it would be something that we'll be getting in real time to see how some of our interventions around encouraging drivers to switch off their engines and things like that, see how that improves air quality. I think that would be a positive thing to highlight to the public to show that these campaigns and interventions that we're asking them to do make a difference. So I'll ask them if they can do that when these sensors are set up and ready. The electric vehicle, I won't answer. I'll just see if Rory wants to answer, knowing it's sort of in his area around sort of timescales on electric vehicles. He might not be able to answer, or if not, we can take it away.
Rory, can you come in?
Sorry, just trying to get my video to work. So I think as Ben's already identified this evening, we've got our hybrid vehicles, first hybrid vehicles already in the council now. They're with Helpline, and I think they'll be implemented this week actually. So they've been in the depot, but they're being used this week for the first time. We've got our EV vehicles on order. So these are our small fleet vehicles that we're going with initially. So this is part of our fleet transition plan. And we'll be piloting these. We haven't been able to place the full order that we'd originally hoped to do, and this is to do with the EV infrastructure that's required to charge them. And the only reason that that project's been slightly delayed is in relation to the Rowan House refurbishment works. So you'll appreciate we'd need access to our EV infrastructure to charge our fleet, but unfortunately, because of the extensive works at Rowan House, we're not going to be able to do that as early as we would have liked. So hence we've had to phase the implementation of the small fleet electric vehicle rollout. But we'll be pleased to, as I say, those are already on order and we should have them in the next couple of months. The EV infrastructure is already being installed at Rowan House, and we also have some EV infrastructure to charge our new vehicles at St John's Car Park too. So that's just a very brief update for the panel.
Thanks for that. We'll move on to Peter.
Very quick one, Julie. Thanks, Mandy, for the information about the orbital. Matthew sent round information, I think it was today, which I found very useful. My question last time, I think, was about cycling, and that answered it beautifully. I have a plan now of the cycleway. So just what I want. Thank you very much.
A satisfied customer, that's what we like to see. I just wanted to ask one question, Ben, which is about the Green Homes grant. I mean, do we have any stats in terms of take up, how many applications there's been, how that's going? Because I think that's something we ought to be monitoring.
We don't, yeah, we've actually got a meeting tomorrow afternoon that I'll be attending, where a representative from the Energy Hub, who've been working with the managing agent delivering the project, giving us the first update on how that's been going. So I can provide stats in like an email in between after that, if I get anything from there.
That's great. I think that all the panel would like to see that. We thank Ben for this report, and thank you for the good work you're doing. Again, this is a report to note, duly noted. Thank you. And so we'll move on to the work plan. I think it is next. Item number 9. Hand over to Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. There are a few changes proposed to the work plan for consider this evening. Briefly, it's been suggested that the item on the draftway strategy be moved to the March meeting, rather than coming February. And the item on the overview of the environment be moved back into the February meeting, so we're switching those two around. We're also proposing an additional item on community engagement to be introduced to the March meeting, and that's at the request of Councillor Chillingworth. At the meeting on the 24th of February, it's proposed that they would consider as a single mode of transport strategy in electric vehicles, an overview of the Environment Act and Climate Emergency Action Plan, and a meeting on the 22nd of March, it's proposed that we would receive a report on the summary of progress, which would include the Climate Emergency Action Plan, draftway strategy, and a community engagement item. And really, is the panel okay with those changes? Thank you.
You're happy with those? Looks like we are, so that is good. brings us to the end of the meeting, 2 hours, just over the 2 hours, so not too bad. Thank you very much, officers, for facilitating our meeting this evening, and declare the meeting closed.